Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending this talk about JavaScript for Apex developers. I am Edith. I am a certified Salesforce developer, and I'm working at Designit. Before joining Designit, I was a Java developer, and I was very focused on the backend. So I spent many years in the backend working there. But then I moved to Salesforce, and the need of Lightning Web Components and Aura components made me move to the front end. And well, to be honest, I struggle a bit with that. And that's why I thought about this presentation to share my experience a little bit and some of the features of modern JavaScript, hoping that this will help you in your transition. So what we are going to see today is what is modern JavaScript. I have chosen 5 features of modern JavaScript to show you, and this is mainly because once we know them, you will be able to read a JavaScript component in a Lightning Web component. And then at the end, some conclusions. So we can start with some a bit of history. And in '95, Netscape, that is was a software vendor for browsers, hired Brendan Eich to help them create a language that will let them add some dynamic content to the web. Imagine in those times they had just static pages and nothing dynamic. So he invented JavaScript in '95. And after that, Netscape had the idea of submitting a standard so that any vendor can use it to implement their own specifications or their own JavaScript, their own languages, sorry. So in '97, the first version of the standard that is called ECMAScript was published. And after that, some minor additions were added in the following years. Then nothing happened in 10 years until 2009, where the version 5 was published. Just a comment in here. It was in 2003 where I was working as a Java developer, like in the backend. And then my company asked me to move to the front end to try JavaScript, all of that. And all of us were like sort of terrified. We didn't like it. It was like very messy and very complex. So I just decided to stay away from the front end as much as possible. And to be honest, I managed to do that for many years. Okay, nothing happened in terms of a standard, but many things were happening in the background. Let's say several frameworks and technologies were being created in those years. And for example, we had Ajax, jQuery, JSON, Strict, and Node.js. And imagine all the features that were invented in these frameworks were already been taken into account in those years. Also, Angular and React.js were invented. So in 2015, the version 6 of the standard was published. And this is what we call modern JavaScript. So whenever you see modern JavaScript, it's basically the version 6 of the standard that has a lot of features defined on it. After version 6, we have several other versions, and it's expected that the standard is going to continue evolving in these years. Okay, the 5 features that I have chosen to show you today are block level declarations, classes, modules, arrow functions, and promises. If we see these features, at the end you will see how easy it is to read a Lightning Web component, JavaScript. Okay, the first one is, I think, the easier for us Java developers, for Apex developers, because we already have something that is called variable scope. The thing with this feature for JavaScript developers is that they didn't have it until the version 6 of the standard. And what this means is that basically whenever you declare either a variable or a constant, that binding is visible just for the block scope that you are declaring it. And in JavaScript, you can have different block scopes. The first one could be a function. And the other one is that you can create any scope just using the curly brackets. And you can use the keywords let and const to declare variables and constants. We'll have an example a bit later. But first, let's remember something in Apex. We have something that is called scope. And we can define variables in Apex to have, for example, a scope in a class. In line number 3, list of names will be visible for my class. I can declare a variable to have a scope of method. For example, in line number 7, my variable all names is visible just for my method. And we can even have a variable just to be defined inside a for loop. For example, the variable name in line number 9. As we know, if we want to use a variable outside of its scope, for example, in line number 13, we will get an error because it's not visible there anymore. And also we have constants in Apex. If we use a static final, we'll have a definition of a constant. And later, if I want to change its value, like in line number 6, I will get an error. So this concept is not alien for us. So we just have to see how to apply it in JavaScript. And as I mentioned before, we can use let and const. For example, here in line number 3, I am declaring a variable that is going to be visible just for this function. So my example will have the variable x. Then later I can change the value or assign a value like in line number 9. But something that I cannot do, and we cannot do that in Apex either, is to define a variable twice in the same scope, like in line number 11. And if you want to use a constant, you can use the const keyword, like in line number 5, but we cannot change its value, the same as in Apex. The next feature would be classes. And this is one of the ones that draw my attention to the front end, and because they use classes in LWC. There are some differences with Apex classes, but we can understand it because we have had classes forever, yeah? So, well, first, classes in ES6 are syntactic sugar, and this means that we can use them in our files, and we can code with them, but at the end, well, they will be translated for us, and they will be translated to custom objects, to custom types that they have already in JavaScript. Another difference is that they don't have many access modifiers as we do. As you know, we can have many like public, private, protected, or something like that. But they don't have that. There is an experimental feature right now that is private field declarations, but it's not really widely available just yet. Another difference is that the constructors in ES6 use the keyword constructor. And they also have several features that we also have, that like static functions, instance methods, getters and setters, and inheritance. So we know what an Apex class is, but here we have a ES6 class. And we can recognize many things in this file. For example, we can declare a class using the keyword class. I can have field declarations like height and width. I have my constructor. And I also can declare many methods. Like in this example, I have a method in line number 10. And then to use a class, I just use the keyword new as we do in Apex. Something different, obviously, from Apex is that it's not it's not related to ES6, but to JavaScript in general. And is that they are dynamically typed. In Apex, we need to specify what type we are having for the variables. For example, in the line number 3, we would need, like, for example, integer or double, something like that. But in JavaScript, well, we don't really have that. The language would do it for us. We can also use inheritance in ES6. And in this example, I'm declaring a superclass that is called point, and then a subclass that is color point that is going to extend point. So you can also recognize many of the things that we have in Apex here. For example, that we can call the constructor of my superclass using super, and the methods of my parent class using super as well. Like, for example, in line number 16. Okay, another feature of ES6 is related to modules. A module, you can think of it just like a chunk of JavaScript code that we have in a given file. An advantage of modules is that all the variables and functions that you have in the module are not visible to the outside world unless you explicitly say so. You also can import modules from other modules and things like that. In Apex, we really don't have a concept, a model concept as per se. But if we declare our class as public or global, we can reuse this class in another class. So in here we have an example of exporting elements from my module. Imagine that my module is called lib, and I want to export a variable, a function, and a class. So in line number 2, 4, and 8, I just use the keyword export before the definitions, and those will be exported for you. There's something that they actually use in Lightning Web Components, and it's called single default export. And this basically is gonna let me export just a single binding from my module. In this case, the only one that I will be exporting is the class rectangle. And we'll see later that this is very used in Lightning Web Components. To import a module, that's sort of easy. I just use the keyword import. I specify what I want to import and from where. And just later, I just use the functions as I would do normally. A pretty cool feature of ES6 is arrow functions. This is a way to write functions in a very concise way, and it's like it really makes your code look sort of pretty and more neat. To use arrow functions, we use a new syntax that uses an arrow. And just as a comment, Apex doesn't have this concept, but whenever you see JavaScript, arrow functions are all over. So this is an important thing to review. So in here, I have several examples of syntax, basically as how to use arrow functions. And it depends on how many parameters you have or the type of return that you want to have as well. It depends if you have multiple parameters, like in line number 2, you need parentheses. Like in line number 5, if you don't you just have one parameter, you don't need parentheses. If you don't have parameters, like in line number 8, you just use the parentheses like as an empty. And if you want to return something that is an object, you have to use parentheses around the definition of the method. And we have a use case in line number 14 that is like basically if you want to use the method filter from arrays, you have to send a function. So in this way, you can use an arrow function to specify a concise way for the filter function to work. So in here, what we are doing is just basically getting all the numbers that are divisible by 3. There's a concept that is a bit confusing, or at least it was confusing for me. And it's because we in Apex or in Java, we really don't have this concept. And it refers to the keyword this. In normal JavaScript, not in ES6, the context of this is not really when you define or declare the function. The context is taken from when the function is invoked. So imagine that that would change. It's not always the same, and it depends on the context that you are running the function on. And this is a new concept that they introduce in arrow functions, that you can use an arrow function to do what we basically sort of know in Apex, that the this will operate in the context of the enclosing scope. So first I have an example of this for normal JavaScript. And in this case, what this code is going to do is gonna print the numbers, or what I intended to do is to print the numbers 1, 2, 3, and so forth, so on, every second. So that is using the method setInterval, and this method requires a function to do something every second. And what I'm trying to do is that the function add will use a variable num that it was declared outside this function, and just to start increasing the number. But the problem is that won't happen. If I run this code, I will get another number in line number 5. And I will get that this, who am I, is window and not counter as I was expecting. And the reason is what I explained before, is because the function add is not really declared as an object. It's just a normal function. And I'm not using the new keyword to instantiate it or something like that. So this is a normal function. And in JavaScript, the normal functions are bound to the global object. if I am running this code in the browser, the global object would be window. So because window doesn't have a number variable declared, and that's why I got not a number in this code. And the way to fix it is replacing the function in line number 3 with a arrow function. And in that case, this arrow function will look into its context and see, is there a variable declared here that I can use? And yeah, it is, because it's in line number 2. And then it's gonna do what I intended it to do on the first place. And the last feature that we are gonna review is promises. Promises help us with asynchronous programming, and you can think of it just like an object that we can use as a placeholder for a computation that is going to happen in the future, and at some point we will have a return value. In this object, I can specify the code that I want to execute later. And something nice about promises is that you can specify explicitly what to execute when the code, when the execution was successful, and what to execute when it failed. Something that we have in Apex is not exactly like promises, because we cannot specify what to do like explicitly, but we have several elements to do asynchronous programming. Some examples are future and queuables. So in here, there's an example of how to use a promise. We need to use, like in line number 1, the constructor of promise, sending a function. And you have to send a function, another function, that is going to be called when everything goes right, and a function that is going to get called when there is an error on the code or on the processing. So you can use a promise, like in line number 2, do something like, for example, call a web service, or maybe execute a method in the backend or something like that, something that is going to take time. So in line number 12, there's an example of how to use a promise. I can use the method then, and then I specify, this is what you have to do when everything goes right. And then the method catch and specify, if something goes wrong in my processing, do this. Okay, now it's time to see a Lightning Web Component. Maybe some of you already know this example. I took this example from Trailhead, and is from Build a Bear tracking app. So this is what you would see like at the end if you code this component. And now we can analyze the code that is behind this this Lightning Web Component. This is a JavaScript file that you can also find in Trailhead. If we remember what we just saw previously, at the beginning, in the first lines, I'm using modules. So I'm importing elements from a module that was specified for us by Salesforce. In line number 5, I am declaring a class. In this case, it's called BearList, that is inheriting from Lightning element. And I'm also just exporting my class using the keyword export default. This is the only element that I'm going to be exporting to the outside world. Then in line number 15, I am using a promise. Get all bears is going to be executing in the backend, doing queries or something in the backend. And if everything goes right, then I will be executing then. And what I'm going to do is that I will store the result in bears, the variable bears. If I get an error, I will store the error in the local error variable. And I'm also using arrow functions in here. So you can see how the code is like clear and neat. So yeah, I think that's a pretty cool feature. Okay, some conclusions is, well, the road to from Apex to JavaScript right now, I think is smoother for us. As I mentioned, in 2003, it was like very chaotic. And even now, if I go back to ES5 files, I think it's much harder for me to read and understand them than ES6 ones. That JavaScript has similar syntax to Apex is an advantage for us. recently I was asked to code something in Shell, and I found out that just adding a space or 2 spaces instead of 1 was not allowed. So it's like, was very different. So it's more complex, but JavaScript has that advantage for us. And as we know, there is more demand to code in JavaScript for us developers. In Salesforce, we have LWC and Evergreen Node, for example, but because now JavaScript is also in the backend, we really need to learn JavaScript. And another advantage is that there are many resources around to learn. Just Google like ES6, like features and all, and you will get a lot of information as well. And we also have Trailhead, where they have lots of information about it as well. And just a message from myself to myself of 2003 is that at some point I will really enjoy coding in JavaScript, unlike at those times that I thought I would never do. Okay, finally, some resources. Mainly, most of them are from Trailhead. But I also got a book that is pretty nice and very clear, explaining the concepts. And I think that's all, because this is not live, so I can answer all your questions online if you have any questions later. And that would be it. Thank you.
Blockchain can help feed more people. And AI can help care for people. VR can help train people. Let's use technology for people to make a greater good in every community, every day. Accenture. New applied now.